Taiwan has a long history of diversity, especially when it comes to languages. Pretty much everyone speaks Mandarin, and 80% of the population speak Taiwanese. There's also Hakka, and many indigenous tribes each have their own language. Added to that, many senior citizens still speak Japanese due to the Japanese previous colonial rule that ended in 1945. Despite government revitalization campaigns that began 30 years ago, many of Taiwan's languages are still in decline. Over the last few decades, the government has tried to incorporate various public education programs to stop these endangered languages from dying out. The world's languages are indeed dying off at an alarming rate, so much so that Tove and Kangas point out that the majority of the language communities over the last 100 years have become victims of linguistic genocide, a phenomenon where language is killed rather than people. To even begin to understand Taiwan's complex diversity of languages and cultures, we must first look at the history of Taiwan and the various different influences that have been bestowed upon it over the last few centuries. The ancestors of the present-day Aboriginal groups in Taiwan are thought to have come to the island from the Asian mainland starting around 5,000 years ago. Through waves of immigration beginning in the 17th century, the first Chinese-speaking settlers were mainly from Guangdong and Fujian, the provinces close to Taiwan. In the 1600s, the Netherlands, Portugal and Spain tried to colonize Taiwan, but the languages and culture had little impact across the island. Immigrants from China continued to come to Taiwan over the next few centuries, and by doing so established Hokkien, Taiwanese, as the main language in Taiwan. The 1895 Sino-Japanese War and defeat of the Qing dynasty led to Japanese rule over Taiwan. Strict language policies were imposed and the use of Taiwan language was banned. Japanese was also taught in schools. Fernandez points out that restrictive language policies promote both a culture of forgetting and an ideology of invisibility. Whether through an authoritarian curriculum of coercion or a liberal humanist ideology of false generosity, these policies deceptively conceal the hegemonic function of education. The end of World War II in 1945 led to the end of the 50-year Japanese rule in Taiwan, with the Republic of China gaining control once more. After losing the civil war to the communists in 1949, the ROC government under Chiang Kai-shek and his National Party retreated from the mainland to Taiwan. During this time, Taiwan's local languages were given a little more freedom under the new administration compared to the Japanese. Mandarin was made the official language and language of instruction, though other languages were banned from public broadcast or restricted in their use. People have often spoken of being punished in school and public for speaking indigenous languages during the Chiang era. Unable to use their languages outside also made it hard to speak it at home. The policies of that period had a deep lasting impact on current language use in Taiwan. Today, fluency in Mandarin is almost universal, and the number of speakers of Taiwanese, Hakka and indigenous languages are all declining. Even those children who hear Taiwanese or other languages at home often learn them incompletely, preferring to communicate in Mandarin. When they in turn have children, the non-Mandarin language is unlikely to be passed on to the next generation. The rapid aging of the Taiwanese population serves to worsen the situation. The young people move to the big cities while the older generations stay home, unable to pass their traditions on. In most of the large cities, Mandarin is predominant, and the lack of consistent contact with home language causes proficiency to erode. Then, those who have become used to speaking Mandarin outside the home may gradually find themselves also speaking at home. Dada and Yutri point out that language minority communities forget their primary languages and cultures and assimilate willingly to the dominant culture and language of the nation state, as a demonstration that they are in fact worthy of accessing citizenship rights. Still, Taiwan's local languages continue to have their cultural and political significance, as becomes evident during election season. For example, Presidents Ma Ying-jeou and Tsai Ing-wen, neither of whom is a native speaker of Taiwanese, have both made great efforts to speak in Taiwanese when campaigning. In Taiwan's political landscape, it is vital to show oneself as a member of the community. The government has long earmarked funds to promote Hakka culture. Every country has its own Hakka association where members of the Hakka minority can gather, spend time together, and practice the language by engaging in activities such as singing traditional Hakka folk songs. Despite the efforts of these organizations, many young Hakkas lack a complete grasp of the language, instead preferring to communicate in Taiwanese or Mandarin. Though many are generally able to understand when spoken to in Hakka, they are unable to pass the language on to their own children, leading to a shift away from Hakka and towards Mandarin. It seems that while the past governmental efforts have slowed language disappearance, they have not succeeded in rejuvenating Taiwan's secondary languages. In a survey organised by the Council of Indigenous People, less than 40% of Aboriginal children under 10 years of age reported using an Indigenous language on a regular basis, and the proportion of adult responders who teach their children Indigenous tongues is around 30%. These low numbers hinder the generational flow of language, the study concluded. In response to the limited success of these earlier language reforms, the government has sought to deepen and broaden the efforts and significant progress that has been achieved over the past several years. The motivation behind these efforts has been the fact that multiculturalism is now seen as an integral part of the Taiwanese experience. Preserving it, therefore, is regarded as vital to maintaining Taiwan's identity. Bartolome has correctly stressed the need to recognize the significance of ideology in education is crucial. Educators must engage with the powerful reality that language, political power, and economics are intrinsically linked to the formation of the nation state, and so language functions as a fundamental human resource for the construction of meaning and the establishment of relationships across private and public spheres. Thus, to restrict people's language is to restrict their expression of humanity. Few of Taiwan's reform programs have actually focused on Taiwanese. Though use of the language is still in decline, it is still spoken by more than 80% of the population and remains a language in everyday use. For the moment, the focus is on languages that are in more imminent need of aid, such as Hakka. In 2017, the Legislative Land passed an amendment further stipulating that Hakka be considered a national language of Taiwan. Legally, Taiwan has no official language, though the de facto national language remains Mandarin. The Hakka Basic Act also provides that the government will fund and provide support for Hakka cultural development, including the use of Hakka in schools and kindergartens, as well as Hakka language radio and television broadcasts. For the 10 indigenous languages with the highest risk of extinction, the Council has created a babysitter program in which speakers of indigenous tongues care for children up to 2 years of age. From the ages of 2 to 5, children can attend indigenous language daycare centres. The goal is to immerse the children in the language from birth and provide a stable foundation to continue learning languages later in life. The National Languages Development Act, implemented in 2019, will continue to promote the preservation and revitalisation of these national languages. The bill calls for a regular conference on the status of Taiwan's national languages, requires a census mechanism and database system to keep track of language use, and provides additional resources for research and development. Instruction in one of Taiwan's national languages, meaning Taiwanese, Hakka, and the indigenous languages, will be guaranteed as part of basic education, and subsidies will be given to radio and television broadcasters who produce content in the national languages. The bill goes as far as to make Taiwanese Sign Language a national language in Taiwan. In June this year, the Council of Indigenous Peoples announced a new program aimed at Indigenous university students for those interested in continuing their education in Indigenous languages. 7 universities have been designated as language learning centres for Indigenous languages. At several of those universities, college students already proficient in one of the languages can tutor interested young children, restoring the cycle of passing language on. Although the future of Taiwan's linguistic diversity remains uncertain, clearly the political will exists to preserve the languages of this multi-ethnic and multicultural country. Taiwan is still at the beginning stage of what will need to be a long-term dedicated effort.